Online chat from the LA Times newsroom. I'm consumer columnist David Lazarus. There's some news out this week. The Census Bureau told us that median wages in the country flat for the past few years. Forbes magazine, meanwhile, telling us that the 1% out there saw their average income rise by about $800 million last year. What's wrong with that picture? Well, to answer that question, we're joined by former Labor Secretary Robert Reich, who is also at the center of a new documentary called Inequality for All. Thank you for joining us.
Delighted, David. Thank you for having me.
So when captains of industry make tens of millions of dollars a year, isn't that the American dream in action?
It's the American dream for them. The problem is most Americans are getting nowhere, working harder than ever, less economic security than they've ever had, at least in living memory. And that has led to a great deal of frustration and anger. Plus, our American politics is now basically in the pockets of a relatively few very wealthy individuals. I mean, we don't have the countervailing power. Labor unions and other institutions we used to have in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And finally, the economy itself. And this is a point that I make in the film, and it's very central. The economy itself is struggling to break out of the gravitational pull of the Great Recession. Why? Because with so much of the income and wealth and economic gains going to the very top, the broad, wide middle class of America, and everybody seeking to get into the middle class who's poor, they don't have the purchasing power to keep the economy going. And the rich, of course, don't spend 100% of their wealth or income, and you get into a very vicious cycle of the economy simply not performing.
If you have questions for Robert Reich, please join us now, and you can reach us via Twitter, hashtag AskLATimes. Your questions will come straight up on this screen right here, and that'll bring you straight into the conversation. We'll be here for a little bit still, so please chime in. Again, you can cut us at Twitter, hashtag AskLATimes. Now, Mr. Reich, you just mentioned the fact that when the middle class doesn't have a lot of spending power, that does create a vicious cycle. Consumer spending accounts for nearly 70% of economic activity here. Why don't the super rich realize that it's in their interest to make sure that everybody has a piece of the pie?
Well, that's a good question. Now, some of them do. I mean, Warren Buffett has called for raising taxes on the wealthy and providing more government stimulus and more investment in infrastructure. And there's a fellow in our film, Nick Hanauer, who says, look, I have an 8-figure income, he says, and I'm only paying 11% of it in taxes. And this is crazy. This is not fair. So you've got a lot of individual wealthy people are speaking out. But the fact of the matter is that the rich would do much better with a smaller share of a rapidly growing economy, growing because more people have more purchasing power, and also an economy and society that was not so riven with anger and frustration on the part of most people who are not getting ahead. Then they will do with a smaller share, that is the rich, a smaller share of a rapidly growing economy and an economy and a society that are less divisive.
Your new documentary, Inequality for All, sort of a piece of the new PowerPoint cinema that's out there. We've got some slides that illustrate what we're talking about.
Wait a minute. Before you, I'll let you get away with that, David.
Did I slap you silly there?
No. But I want people to know, and this is based on screenings we've done. We've done about 15 screenings before. It's coming out next week. People come out saying, I laughed, I cried, this is entertainment. This is not a PowerPoint presentation. I mean, Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth did play some part in our thinking, but I'm much funnier than Al Gore.
Let me set that up differently. Where Avatar leaves off, helpful, okay. I want to go to a slide here because this is central to the thesis that you're presenting, and I think it's very helpful to see this visually. It's the bridge slide. And now tell us what we're looking at right here.
Okay, those are the two peak years, 1928 and 2007, where the top 1% received the most as a percentage of total income. That is, in 1928, the top 1% took about 23.5% of total national income. Huge record. And then we hit that same record again in 2007. Interestingly, the year after these peaks, the economy took a nosedive. In 1929, we went into the Great Recession, in fact, the Great Depression. And in 2008, we went into the Great Recession.
Why?
Well, it's not just coincidence. When so much of the purchasing power, so much economic gain goes to the very top, there's simply not enough purchasing power in the rest of the economy. Most people just can't keep the economy going. And that's why even now we are prone, it's a very fragile economy, we're very prone to booms and busts and chronically high unemployment. If the Fed did not keep up that bond buying program, $85 billion a month, then this economy would be in far worse shape than it is. We're almost dependent on that steroid now because there's not enough purchasing power in the broad base of American people. They can't borrow as they did before. Hopefully we won't go back to that kind of borrowing. But if we're not going to go back to that kind of borrowing and their wages are going nowhere, where is the demand going to come from?
If you're just joining us, we're speaking with former Labor Secretary Robert Reich, who has a new documentary coming out next week called Inequality for All. If you've got questions, if you want to address this matter of income inequality, please do so. And you can find us via Twitter, #AskLATimes. I want to bring up one more slide here because this one demonstrates the point you just made about the volume of wealth that is accumulated by the 1%. And interestingly, it matches the other graph we just looked at.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what we see in the film is that it's almost a kind of suspension bridge between 1928 and 2007. In the middle years, from about 1950 to mid-1970s, you have very low inequality, but very rapid economic growth. Everybody got a piece of the action. It was a time of widespread prosperity, and it sort of belies the point that many supply-side trickle-down proponents say, that if the wealthy are the job creators, that if you make them even more wealthy, they'll do even better, and everybody else will do better. Well, that's not the case. In those middle years, those first 3 decades after the Second World War, actually, we had a much more equitable society. Prosperity was much more widely shared, and we grew faster. The taxes on top earners were never below 70% marginal income tax.
We've got a graph on that too. Let's see the tax graph because it, again, dovetails with everything else that we're talking about here.
Now look, graphophobes may recoil from this graph a little bit, but let me explain.
Yeah.
You see the same suspension bridge behind there. That is the 2 peak years, 1928 and 2007 in terms of inequality. But what you also see is that the wealthy people in this society had so much power during those peak times that they managed to get their marginal taxes very low. So marginal taxes were very low in the 1920s, leading up to the 1930s. Marginal taxes were very low after 1978, 80, 82. In between that period of rapid growth, the great prosperity, you had marginal taxes that, well, under Dwight Eisenhower, who nobody would accuse of being a socialist. He was a Republican president. The marginal income tax was 91% on top earners.
But if I was a super rich person and I saw a 91% tax rate, I would think that's not fair.
Well, interestingly, even when you get rid of all and include, that is, all the deductions and tax credits, the top income earners were paying over 50%. They didn't complain. I mean, obviously they complained. I mean, nobody wants to pay taxes. But politically, there was not a great backlash because the economy was doing so well, and they were doing so well in it. Which makes the point I was making before. It's not a zero-sum game in which the only way that the middle class and the poor can do better is if the wealthy do less well. It's actually a positive-sum game. At least it could be if the wealthy took home a smaller share and the economy grew faster, as it did in those first 3 decades after the Second World War, and the wealthy actually ended up, because of that economic growth, doing better than they otherwise would have.
So what's the answer here? Tax Bill Gates more or pay me more?
Well, I don't think there's a magic bullet. Number one, I think we've got to raise the minimum wage to something closer to a living wage, expand the earned income tax credit. We've got to do a much better job with schools, particularly in poor and lower middle class and working class areas. We've got to make sure that the financial regulation bites and constrains Wall Street. We don't have, so we don't have another catastrophe that hurt the middle class and poor much more than it's ended up hurting the people at the top of Wall Street. We've got to bring back Glass-Steagall, which used to separate investment from commercial banking. We've got to cap the size of the banks. We've got to have a more equitable tax structure. That is not just income taxes in terms of a higher marginal income tax on very wealthy people and a lower tax on the middle class and the poor, but even the Social Security tax system, David. I think we ought to exempt the first $15,000 of income from Social Security taxes, everybody's first $15,000, and then take the lid off the portion of income that is subjected to Social Security
Where is the
payroll
lid right now?
taxes. Right now, it's about I think it's the last time I saw it was $101,600. Above that, if you make any money above that, you don't pay a penny in Social Security payroll taxes. Why not take the lid off, make the Social Security payroll tax system a progressive tax system? 80% of Americans are paying more in Social Security payroll taxes than they are in income taxes.
If we lifted that lid, would that solve all of Social Security's and Medicare's woes right there?
Not Medicare. It would solve Social Security's problems. I used to be a trustee of the Social Security Trust Fund and the Medicare Trust Fund. I can tell you that Medicare is a separate issue. Medicare is a problem, but it's not because Medicare is the problem. It's a problem because you've got a baby boom generation, 76 million boomers who are all facing retirement over the next 25, 30 years, and healthcare costs are going up. That's the problem. It's not Medicare. It's a problem of boomers and rising healthcare costs.
We're speaking with former Labor Secretary Robert Reich. His documentary is out next week, Inequality for All. If you got a question, find us on Twitter, #AskLATimes. Jerry writes in to say, why are Americans so whiny? This is our country. We move it, we control it, we operate it, we choose our politicians. Blaming Obama for our problems is infantile. Without personal responsibility, we will just make the same mistakes over and over. I guess he's pointing a finger at conservatives there who are saying that Obama seems to be running a socialist campaign. And yet many of the economic policies I've seen from the Obama administration have been moderate at best.
Moderate to conservative. I mean, even the Affordable Care Act that conservative Republicans are apoplectic about. I mean, that was modeled after a Republican health care plan.
Thank you, Hoover Institution.
Well, yes, that's right. The Democrats actually wanted to build a universal health care system on the model of Medicare, Medicare for all, using the Social Security tax base or the Medicare tax base. But conservatives said, no, we want to keep our health care system as is, private, and let's just have government provide subsidies where necessary. And also said conservatives 20 years ago when we started debating this, we'll have to make it mandatory in terms of paying into it as well. Well, now that we have the Affordable Care Act, it passed both houses of Congress. The president signed it. It has withstood a challenge to the Supreme Court. Now we have Republicans. What are they doing? They are threatening to close down government come the end of this month if they don't get a repeal or defund the Affordable Care Act. I mean, this is nuts.
All right, but since we're talking politics here, when we look at a political situation this polarized and we examine an issue like income inequality, how on earth do we get all of these various players together to address these questions?
Well, one thing we've got to do is get big money out of politics. And the film talks about this, David. It's one of the big problems of having such concentrated income and wealth is you've got a few major players like the Koch brothers. They can fund these conservative groups. These conservative groups in turn can run in Republican primaries right-wing. My view is that they're right-wing fanatics, but let's just, that's my view. But they are very conservative. They are very right-wing. And that means that any incumbent Republican is worried to death about the primaries. And, effectively, that is pushing the Republican Party so far to the right that Barry Goldwater would be embarrassed.
I've got another question here from Twitter. You asks, isn't it inevitable that globalization plus technology, which means higher productivity, will drive U.S. wages lower and lower?
It's not inevitable if we do what some other countries are doing and do what we also did, by the way, in the first 3 decades of after the Second World War. Invest like mad in our people, in education, in early childhood education, in affordable higher education, in technical education. I mean, Germany, not every kid has to go to a 4-year college in Germany, but they get the world's first-class technical education, which explains why the German median wage, in terms of purchasing power parity, is higher than our median wage. And it also explains why you have a much more equitable distribution of income in Germany. Other countries are doing a better job than the United States in terms of dealing with these global forces and the technological forces, and are not experiencing nearly the inequality we are. We are the outlier. We are far more unequal than any other advanced economy, advanced society in the world, and we are surging toward greater and greater inequality at record levels.
How did America become so short-sighted?
Well, I think for one thing, for 3 decades, and I can speak personally because I was I was labor secretary in the Clinton administration, and I saw much of this going on. For 3 decades, the middle class in this country held on, first by women going into paid work, a lot of young mothers into paid work. That was a social revolution. They went into paid work not because of these wonderful opportunities for professional women. Most went into paid work to maintain family incomes because male wages adjusted for inflation were dropping. And then families worked longer hours, and then families used their homes as piggy banks starting in the late 90s and took out loans against their homes, using their homes as collateral, refinanced their homes, and that also sort of staved off the inevitable. So essentially, David, the answer to your question is that for 3 decades, most of us have taken our eye off the economy, off the underlying economy. Our politicians have not provided the leadership. I was part of the Clinton administration. I'm very proud that we had a very good economy. But Bill Clinton and Bob Rubin, his Secretary of the Treasury, and Larry Summers, they got rid of Glass-Steagall. They deregulated finance. They said to the Commodity Futures Trading Corporation, we don't want to regulate derivatives. I mean, talk about short-sightedness. I'm not going to defend the Clinton administration, nor obviously am I going to defend the George W. Bush administration.
Do you get a sense when you see this level of income inequality that there will be a groundswell of anger and outrage among the citizenry? Not off with their heads sort of outrage, but because I never get a sense of that these days.
Well, I do. I mean, look, people are angry. Every poll shows a degree of anger and animosity today that we have not seen in this country in living memory. Their trust expressed by Americans toward every institution in our society, government, business, the media, is at an all-time low over the last 40 years. People, just look on the internet. It's a cauldron of bile, of vitriol. We have not been this divided and this angry in my lifetime. And I've seen a lot of divisive issues. I mean, the civil rights movement was very divisive. The Vietnam War was very divisive. My earliest memories are Joe McCarthy and his communist witch hunts of the 1950s. That was pretty divisive. But that divisiveness did not lead to the degree of anger we are now experiencing.
All right, but wait, this is the 2-year anniversary this week of Occupy Wall Street. What came of it? I mean, we saw all that outrage hitting the streets. What came of it?
Well, people tell me, and I get a lot of emails from people who say the Occupy movement lives. They're not very well organized, in my view, but the Tea Partiers came out of the same Wall Street bailout, the same anger about government and business becoming too collusive against the rest of us, the same sense that the dice are loaded, the game is rigged against average people. Now, it is true, Tea Partiers took aim at government, the occupiers took aim at Wall Street, but they both grew out of the same anger and the same frustration and the same suspicion about how the system is rigged for the privileged and powerful.
Yeah, but here's one of the problems, and that is if the government is a source of much of your bile and the government is intrinsic to the solution, how do the twain meet?
Well, that's exactly the point. And I say, and I do speak to Tea Partiers a lot, I say the only way we're going to get a turnaround here is if we have a truly grassroots movement outside Washington. Washington is not a leading indicator. And Tea Partiers, if you want to link up with occupiers, this should not be left versus right. This is really a matter of people who understand the game is rigged against the people who are doing the rigging, and taking the economy, reestablishing broad-based prosperity and reestablishing the principle of equal opportunity, not equal results. Equal opportunity. That's what we are losing in this country.
But you speak in the documentary about the importance of regulation. I've got a question here via Twitter from Joshua who says, when will liberals learn that economics are based on the free market and not government?
Well, look, there are a lot of people like Joshua, and with due respect to Joshua, who thinks that there is something called a free market that exists outside government. I mean, actually, there's no free market in nature. Nature is kind of social Darwinism. That is survival of the fittest. What government does is it sets the rules of the game. What is property? Should the genome be property, be saleable? Should babies be sold? Should should children be up for sale in terms of their labors? What sort of bankruptcy laws, what kind of antitrust laws? I mean, all of these are the rules of the game that governments inevitably have got to establish and enforce if we're going to have a market at all. And the real issue is not so much, do you like government or do you not like government? The real issue is, what are the rules going to be? Are they going to be rules that spread prosperity as well as growth and efficiency? Or are they going to be rules that are tilted in favor of people who are very wealthy, who continuously get special tax breaks, special subsidies, and enormous advantages that the rest of this country doesn't get?
Are you an optimist or a pessimist?
I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist because I look back on American history and I see that between, say, 1901 and 1916, the progressive era, and then again between 1933 and 1939, the New Deal, and then again between 1963 and 1968, the Great Society, the War on Poverty, we expanded opportunity. We were relentless. When capitalism gets off the rails in this country, and other countries, they go into fascism or communism, or they have revolutions, or people take to the streets. In this country, over and over again, we save capitalism from its own excesses. We've done it over and over again, and we will do it again. When people understand the extent of inequality, even Republicans, even conservatives, they go, I didn't know it was that bad. That's the key. That's why we did the film, to make sure that people understand what's going on. But I want to emphasize again, David, this is an entertaining film. This is not just a lecture. This is not an eat your spinach. This is a film that people tell me they enjoy immensely.
Robert Reich, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks.
Inequality for All opens up nationwide next week. It's terrific. I've seen it. I recommend it highly. And for the very latest business news, stay right here at latimes.com.